Chapter 13. The youth went slowly toward the fire, indicated by his departed friend. As he reeled, he bethought him of the welcome his comrades would give him. He had a conviction that he would soon feel in his sore heart the barbed missiles of ridicule. He had no strength to invent a tale. He would be a soft target. He made vague plans to go off into the deeper darkness and hide, but they were all destroyed by the voices of exhaustion and pain from his body. His ailments clamoring forced him to seek the place of food and rest, at whatever cost. He swung unsteadily toward the fire. He could see the forms of men throwing black shadows in the red light, and as he went nearer, it became known to him, in some way, that the ground was strewn with sleeping men. Of a sudden, he confronted a black and monstrous figure. A rifle barrel caught some glinting beams. "Halt! Halt!" He was dismayed for a moment, but he presently thought that he recognized the nervous voice. As he stood tottering before the rifle barrel, he called out, "What? Hello, Wilson. You here?" The rifle was lowered to a position of caution, and the loud soldier came slowly forward. He peered into the youth's face. "That you, Henry?" "Yes, it is. It's me." "Well, well, old boy," said the other. "By Ginger, I'm glad to see you. I give you up for a goner. I thought you was dead, sure enough." There was a husky emotion in his voice. The youth found that now he could barely stand upon his feet. There was a sudden sinking of his forces. He thought he must hasten to produce his tale to protect him from the missiles already at the lips of his redoubtable comrades. So, staggering before the loud soldier, he began, Yes, I've had an awful time. I've been all over. Why, over on the right? Terrible fighting over there. Had an awful time. I got separated from the regiment. Over on the right. Got shot in the head. I never see such fighting. Awful time. I don't see how I could have got separated from the regiment. Got shot too. His friend had stepped forward quickly. What? Got shot? Why didn't you say so first, poor old boy? We must have... Hold on a minute. What am I doing? I'll call Simpson. Another figure at that moment loomed in the gloom. They could see that it was the corporal. "Who you talking to, Wilson?" he demanded. His voice was anger-toned. "Who you talking to? You the damnedest sentinel. Why, hello, Henry. You here? Why, I thought you was dead 4 hours ago. Great Jerusalem, they keep turning up every 10 minutes or so. We thought we'd lost 42 men by straight count, but if they keep a-coming in this way, we'll get the company all back by morning yet. Where was you?" "Over on the right. I got separated," began the youth with considerable glibness. But his friend had interrupted hastily. "Yeah, and he got shot in the head, and he's in a fix, and we must see to him right away." He rested his rifle in the hollow of his left arm and his right around the youth's shoulder. "Gee, it must hurt like thunder," he said. The youth leaned heavily upon his friend. "Yes, it hurts. Hurts a good deal," he replied. There was a faltering in his voice. "Oh," said the corporal. He linked his arm in the youth and drew him forward. "Come on, Henry. I'll take care of you." As they went on together, the loud private called out after them. "Put him to sleep in my blanket, Simpson. And hold on a minute. Here's my canteen. It's full of coffee. Look at his head by the fire and see how it looks. Maybe it's a pretty bad one. When I get relieved in a couple of minutes, I'll be over and see to him." The youth's senses were so deadened that his friend's voice sounded from afar, and he could scarcely feel the pressure of the corporal's arm. He submitted passively to the latter's directing strength. His head was in the old manner hanging forward upon his breast. His knees wobbled. The corporal led him into the glare of the fire. "Now, Henry," he said, "let's have a look at your old head." The youth sat down obediently, and the corporal, laying aside his rifle, began to fumble in the bushy hair of his comrade. He was obliged to turn the other's head so that the full flush of the firelight would beam upon it. He puckered his mouth with a critical air. He drew back his lips and whistled through his teeth when his fingers came in contact with the splashed blood in the rare wound. "Ah, here we are," he said. He awkwardly made further investigations. "Just as I thought," he added presently. "You've been grazed by a ball." It's raised a queer lump, just as if some feller had slammed you on the head with a club. It stopped the bleeding a long time ago. The most about it is that in the morning you'll feel that a number 10 hat wouldn't fit you, and your head'll be all head up and feel as dry as burnt pork. And you may get a lot of other sicknesses too by morning. You can't never tell. Still, I don't much think so. It's just damn good belt on the head and nothing more. Then you just sit here and don't move while I go rout out the relief. Then I'll send Wilson to take care of you." The corporal went away. The youth remained on the ground like a parcel. He stared with a vacant look into the fire. After a time he aroused for some part, and the things about him began to take form. He saw that the ground in the deep shadows was cluttered with men sprawling in every conceivable posture. Glancing narrowly into the more distant darkness, he caught occasional glimpses of visages that loomed pallid and ghostly, lit with a phosphorescent glow. These faces expressed in their lines the deep stupor of the tired soldiers. They made them appear like men drunk with wine. This bit of forest might have appeared to an eternal wanderer as a scene of the result of some frightful debauch. On the other side of the fire the youth observed an officer asleep, seated bolt upright, with his back against a tree. There was something perilous in his position. Badgered by dreams, perhaps, he swayed with little bounces and starts like an old toddy-stricken grandfather in a chimney corner. Dust and stains were upon his face. His lower jaw hung down as if lacking strength to assume its normal position. He was the picture of an exhausted soldier after a feast of war. He had evidently gone to sleep with his sword in his arms. These two had slumbered in an embrace, but the weapon had been allowed in time to fall unheeded to the ground. The brass-mounted hilt lay in contact with some parts of the fire. Within the gleam of rose and orange light from the burning sticks were other soldiers snoring and heaving, or lying death-like in slumber. A few pairs of legs were stuck forth, rigid and straight. The shoes displayed the mud or dust of marches, and bits of rounded trousers protruding from the blankets showed rents and tears from hurried pitchings through the dense brambles. The fire cracked musically. From it swelled light smoke. Overhead the foliage moved softly. The leaves, with their faces turned toward the blaze, were colored shifting hues of silver, often edged with red. Far off to the right, through a window in the forest, could be seen a handful of stars lying like glittering pebbles on the black level of the night. Occasionally, in this low-arched hall, a soldier would arouse and turn his body to a new position, the experience of his sleep having taught him of uneven and objectionable places upon the ground under him. Or perhaps he would lift himself to a sitting posture, blanket the fire for an unintelligent moment, throw a swift glance at his prostrate companion, and then cuddle down again with a grunt of sleepy content. The youth sat in a forlorn heap until his friend, the loud young soldier, came swinging 2 canteens by their light strings. "Well now, Henry, old boy," said the latter, "we'll have you fixed in just about a minute." He had the bustling ways of an amateur nurse. He fussed around the fire and stirred the sticks to brilliant exertions. He made his patient drink largely from the canteen that contained the coffee. It was to the youth a delicious draught. He tilted his head far back and held the canteen long to his lips. The cool mixture went caressingly down his blistered throat. Having finished, he sighed with comfortable delight. The loud young soldier watched his comrade with an air of satisfaction. He later produced an extensive handkerchief from his pocket. He folded it into a manner of bandage, and soused water from the other canteen upon the middle of it. This crude arrangement he bound over the youth's head, tying the ends in a queer knot at the back of the neck. "There," he said, moving off and surveying his deed. "You look like the devil, but I bet you'll feel better." The youth contemplated his friend with grateful eyes. Upon his aching and swelling head, the cold cloth was like a tender woman's hand. "You don't holler nor say nothing," remarked his friend approvingly. "And I know I'm a blacksmith at taking care of sick folk, and you never squeaked. You're good 'un, Henry. Most of the men would have been in the hospital long ago. A shot in the head ain't fooling business." The youth made no reply, but began to fumble with the buttons on his jacket. "Well, come now. continued his friend. Come on. I must put you to bed and see that you get a good night's rest. The other got carefully erect, and the loud young soldier led him among the sleeping forms, lying in groups and rows. Presently he stopped and picked up his blankets. He spread the rubber one upon the ground and placed the woolen one about the youth's shoulders. There now, he said, lie down and get some sleep. The youth, with his manner of dog-like obedience, got carefully down like a crone stooping. He stretched out with a murmur of relief and comfort. The ground felt like the softest couch. But of a sudden he ejaculated, Hold on a minute. Where are you going to sleep? His friend waved his hand impatiently. Right down here by you. Well, but hold on a minute, continued the youth. Where are you going to sleep in? I've got your... The loud young soldier snarled. Shut up and go to sleep. Don't be making a damn fool of yourself, he said severely. After the reproof, the youth said no more. An exquisite drowsiness had spread through him. The warm comfort of the blanket enveloped him, and made a gentle languor. His head fell forward on his crooked arm, and his weighted lids went softly down over his eyes. Hearing a splatter of musketry from the distance, he wondered indifferently if those men sometimes slept. He gave a long sigh, snuggled down into his blanket, and in a moment was like his comrades. End of chapter 13. By Stephen Crane, chapter 14. When the youth awoke, it seemed to him that he had been asleep for 1,000 years, and he felt sure that he opened his eyes upon an unexpected world. Gray mists were slowly shifting before the first efforts of the sun rays. An impending splendor could be seen in the eastern sky. An icy dew had chilled his face, and immediately upon arousing he curled further down into his blanket. He stared for a while at the leaves overhead, moving in a heraldic wind of the day. The distance was splintering and blaring with the noise of fighting. There was in the sound an expression of a deadly persistency, as if it had not begun and was not to cease. About him were the rows and groups of men that he had dimly seen the previous night. They were getting a last draught of sleep before the awakening. The gaunt, careworn features and dusty figures were made plain by this quaint light at the dawning, but it dressed the skin of the men in corpse-like hues, and made the tangled limbs appear pulseless and dead. The youth started up with a little cry, when his eyes first swept over the motionless mass of men, thick spread upon the ground, pallid, and in strange postures. His disordered mind interpreted the hall of the forest as a charnel place. He believed for an instant that he was in the house of the dead, and he did not dare to move, lest these corpses start up, squalling and squawking. In a second, however, he achieved his proper mind. He swore a complicated oath at himself. He saw that this somber picture was not a fact of the present, but a mere prophecy. He heard then the noise of a fire crackling briskly in the cold air, and turning his head, he saw his friend pottering busily about a small blaze. A few other figures moved in the fog, and he heard the hard crackling of axe blows. Suddenly there was a hollow rumble of drums. A distant bugle sang faintly. Similar sounds, varying in strength, came from near and far over the forest. The bugles called to each other like brazen gamecocks. The near thunder of the regimental drums rolled. The body of men in the woods rustled. There was a general uplifting of heads. A murmuring of voices broke upon the air. In it there was much bass of grumbling oaths. Strange gods were addressed in condemnation of the early hours necessary to correct war. An officer's peremptory tenor rang out and quickened the stiffened movement of the men. The tangled limbs unraveled. The corpse-hued faces were hidden behind fists that twisted slowly in the eye sockets. The youth sat up and gave vent to an enormous yawn. "Thunder," he remarked petulantly. He rubbed his eyes, and then, putting up his hand, felt carefully of the bandage over his wound. His friend, perceiving him to be awake, came from the fire. "Well, Harry, old man, how do you feel this morning?" he demanded. The youth yawned again. Then he puckered his mouth to a little pucker. His head, in truth, felt precisely like a melon, and there was an unpleasant sensation at his stomach. "Oh, Lord, I feel pretty bad," he said. "Thunder!" exclaimed the other. "I hoped you'd feel all right this morning. Let's see the bandage. I guess it slipped." He began to tinker at the wound in rather a clumsy way until the youth exploded. "Gosh darn it," he said in a sharp irritation. "You're the hangedest man I ever saw. You wear muffs on your hands. Why in good thunderation can't you be more easy? I'd rather you'd stand off and throw guns at it. Now go slow, and don't act as if you was nailing down a carpet." He glared with insolent command at his friend, but the latter answered soothingly. "Well, well, come now and get some grub," he said, "and maybe you'll feel better." At the fireside, the loud young soldier watched over his comrade's wants with tenderness and care. He was very busy marshalling the little black vagabonds of tin cups and pouring into them the steamy iron-colored mixture from a small and sooty tin pail. He had some fresh meat, which he roasted hurriedly upon a stick. He sat down then and contemplated the youth's appetite with glee. The youth took note of a remarkable change in his comrade since those days of camp life upon the river bank. He seemed no more to be continually regarding the proportions of his personal prowess. He was not furious at small words that practised conceits. He was no more a loud young soldier. There was about him now a fine reliance. He showed a quiet belief in his purposes and his abilities, and this inward confidence evidently enabled him to be indifferent to little words of other men aimed at him. The youth reflected. He had been used to regarding his comrade as a blatant child with an audacity grown from his inexperience, thoughtless, headstrong, jealous, and filled with a tinsel courage, a swaggering babe accustomed to strut in his own dooryard. The youth wondered where had been born these new eyes, when his comrade had made the great discovery that there were many men who would refuse to be subjected by him. Apparently, the other had now climbed a peak of wisdom from which he could perceive himself as a very wee thing, and the youth saw that ever after it would be easier to live in his friend's neighborhood. His comrade balanced his ebony coffee cup on his knee. "Well, Henry," he said, "what do you think the chances are? Do you think we'll wallop 'em?" The youth considered for a moment. "The day before yesterday," he finally replied with boldness, "you would have bet you'd lick the whole kit and caboodle all by yourself." His friend looked a trifle amazed. "Would I?" he asked. He pondered. "Well, perhaps I would," he decided at last. He stared humbly at the fire. The youth was quite disconcerted at this surprising reception of his remarks. "Oh, no, you wouldn't either," he said hastily, trying to retrace. But the other made a deprecating gesture. "Ah, you needn't mind, Henry," he said. "I believe I was a pretty big fool in those days." He spoke as after a lapse of years. There was a little pause. "All the officers say we got the rebs in a pretty tight box," said his friend, clearing his throat in a commonplace way. "They all seem to think we've got 'em just where we want 'em." "I don't know about that," the youth replied. "What I seen over on the right makes me think it was the other way about. From where I was, it looked as if we was getting a good pounding yesterday." "You think so?" inquired the friend. "I thought we handled 'em pretty rough yesterday." "Not a bit," said the youth. "Why, Lord, man, you didn't see nothing of the fight." "Why?" Then a sudden thought came to him. "Oh, Jim Conklin's dead." His friend started. "What? Is he? Jim Conklin?" The youth spoke slowly. "Yes, he's dead, shot in the side." "You don't say so, Jim Conklin? Poor cuss." All about them were other small fires surrounded by men with their little black utensils. From one of these near came sudden sharp voices in a row. It appeared that two light-footed soldiers had been teasing a huge bearded man, causing him to spill coffee upon his blue knees. The man had gone into a rage and had sworn comprehensively. Stung by his language, his tormentors had immediately bristled at him with a great show of resenting a just oath. Possibly there was going to be a fight. The friends arose and went over to them, making pacific motions with his arms. "Oh, here now, boys. What's the use?" he said. We'll be at the Rebs in less than an hour. What's the good fighting among ourselves?" One of the light-footed soldiers turned upon him red-faced and violent. "You needn't come around here with your preaching. I suppose you don't approve of fighting since Charlie Morgan licked you, huh? But I didn't see what business this here is yours or anybody else." "Well, it ain't," said the friend mildly. "Still, I hate to see." There was a tangled argument. "Well, he," said the two, indicating their opponent with accusing forefingers. The huge soldier was quite purple with rage. He pointed at the two soldiers with his great hand extended claw-like. "Well, they..." But during this argumentative time, their desire to deal blows seemed to pass, although they said much to each other. Finally, the friend returned to his old seat. In a short while, the three antagonists could be seen together in an amiable bunch. "Jimmy Rogers says I'll have to fight him after the battle today," announced the friend, as he again seated himself. "He says he don't allow no interfering in his business. I hate to see the boys fighting among themselves." The youth laughed. "You're changed a good bit. He ain't all like he was. I remember when you and that Irish feller..." He stopped and laughed again. "No, I didn't used to be that way," said his friend thoughtfully. "That's true enough." "Well, I didn't mean..." began the youth. The friend made another depreciatory gesture. "Oh, yeah, needn't mind, Henry." There was another little pause. "The regiment lost over half the men yesterday," remarked the friend eventually. "I thought, of course, they was all dead, but, laws, they kept a-comin' back last night until it seems, after all, we didn't lose but a few. They'd been scattered all over, wandering around the woods, fighting with other regiments and everything, just like you done." "So," said the youth. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15. The regiment was standing at order arms at the side of a lane, waiting for the command to march, when suddenly the youth remembered the little packet enwrapped in a faded yellow envelope, which the loud young soldier with lugubrious words had entrusted to him. It made him start. He uttered an exclamation and turned toward his comrade. "Wilson!" "What?" His friend at his side in the ranks was thoughtfully staring down the road. From some cause his expression was at that moment very meek. The youth, regarding him with sidelong glances, felt impelled to change his purpose. "Oh, nothing," he said. His friend turned his head in some surprise. "Why, what was you going to say?" "Oh, nothing," repeated the youth. He resolved not to deal the little blow. It was sufficient that the fact made him glad. It was not necessary to knock his friend on the head with the misguided packet. He had been possessed of much fear of his friend, for he saw how easily questionings could make holes in his feelings. Lately, he had assured himself that the altered comrade would not tantalize him with a persistent curiosity, but he felt certain that during the first period of leisure his friend would ask him to relate his adventures of the previous day. He now rejoiced in the possession of a small weapon, with which he could prostrate his comrade at the first sign of a cross-examination. He was master. It would now be he who could laugh and shoot the shaft of derision. The friend had, in a weak hour, spoken with sobs of his own death. He had delivered a melancholy oration previous to his funeral, and had doubtless in the packet of letters presented various keepsakes to relatives. But he had not died, and thus he had delivered himself into the hands of the youth. The latter felt immensely superior to his friend, but he inclined to condescension. He adopted towards him an air of patronizing good humor. His self-pride was now entirely restored. In the shade of its flourishing growth, he stood with braced and self-confident legs, and since nothing could now be discovered, he did not shrink from an encounter with the eyes of judges, and allowed no thoughts of his own to keep him from an attitude of manfulness. He had performed his mistakes in the dark, so he was still a man. Indeed, when he remembered his fortunes of yesterday, and looked at them from a distance, he began to see something fine there. He had license to be pompous and veteran-like. His panting agonies of the past he put out of his sight. In the present, he declared to himself that it was only the doomed and the damned who roared with sincerity at circumstance. Few but they ever did. A man with a full stomach and the respect of his fellows had no business to scold about anything that he might think to be wrong in the ways of the universe, or even with the ways of society. Let the unfortunate rail, the others may play marbles. He did not give a great deal of thought to these battles that lay directly before him. It was not essential that he should plan his ways in regard to them. He had been taught that many obligations of a life were easily avoided. The lessons of yesterday had been that retribution was a laggard and blind. With these facts before him, he did not deem it necessary that he should become feverish over the possibilities of the ensuing 24 hours. He could leave much to chance. Besides, a faith in himself had secretly blossomed. There was a little flower of confidence growing within him. He was now a man of experience. He had been out among the dragons, he said, and assured himself that they were not so hideous as he had imagined them. Also, they were inaccurate. They did not sting with precision. A stout heart often defied, and defying escaped. And furthermore, how could they kill him who was the chosen of gods and doomed to greatness? He remembered how some of the men had run from the battle. As he recalled their terror-struck faces, he felt a scorn for them. They had surely been more fleet and more wild than was absolutely necessary. They were weak mortals. As for himself, he had fled with discretion and dignity. He was aroused from his reverie by his friend, who, having hitched about nervously and blinked at the trees for a time, suddenly coughed in an introductory way and spoke. "Fleming?" "What?" The friend put his hand up to his mouth and coughed again. He fidgeted in his jacket. "Well," he gulped at last, "I guess you might as well give me back them letters." Dark, prickling blood had rushed into his cheeks and brow. "All right, Wilson," said the youth. He loosened 2 buttons of his coat, thrust in his hand, and brought forth the packet. As he extended it to his friend, the latter's face was turned from him. He had been slow in the act of producing the packet, because during it he had been trying to invent a remarkable comment upon the affair. He could conjure nothing of sufficient point. He was compelled to allow his friend to escape unmolested with his packet, and for this he took unto himself considerable credit. It was a generous thing. His friend at his side seemed suffering great shame. As he contemplated him, the youth felt his heart grow more strong and stout. He had never been compelled to blush in such manner for his acts. He was an individual of extraordinary virtues. He reflected with condescending pity. Too bad, poor devil. It makes him feel tough. After this incident, and as he reviewed the battle pictures he had seen, he felt quite competent to return home and make the hearts of the people glow with stories of war. He could see himself in a room of warm tints telling tales to listeners. He could exhibit laurels. They were insignificant, though in a district where laurels were infrequent, they might shine. He saw his gaping audience picturing him as the central figure in blazing scenes, and he imagined the consternation and ejaculations of his mother and the young lady at the seminary as they drank his recitals, their vague feminine formula for beloved ones doing brave deeds on the field of battle without risk of life would be destroyed. End of chapter 15.